It's time to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of your players. In this villain types video, we're looking at the Barbarian. Okay, so what is a barbarian as refers to a sort of big bad or end of level boss? Well, if we look in the Cambridge Dictionary, the definition of a barbarian is a member of a group of people from a very different country or culture that is considered to be less socially advanced and more violent than your own. In many RPGs, civilization is equated with goodness and peace and also law. Now, whether you think this is right or wrong is a topic for another, and no doubt much longer video than this, but more traditional RPGs often focus on player characters going out and reclaiming or taming the wilderness, spreading some version of civilization. The trope of a player party romping out from a town, city or other bastion of civilization into the chaotic lands beyond, pushing back barbaric monsters and creatures to forge a foothold for civilization is well established. The Barbarian, in terms of an RPG villain, comes from outside the established boundary of civilization in your campaign, whether they're from a combative monster race or simply a different group of humans, think Conan and the Sumerians, is entirely down to your campaign world and the needs of your game. In my opinion, the purpose of a barbarian villain isn't to make some point about colonialism or any of the other hot topics in RPGs at the minute, although you can certainly slant it that way should you so wish, and some points in this video may touch on that, but to provide a stark contrast to the comforts of civilization in a typical RPG. Now, you can play it the other way and have the PCs be members of a barbarian horde trying to cast down the weak civilized society. Hell, D&D even has a barbarian class, so go nuts. But if the barbarian is a villain, it seems logical that this isn't the case. The barbarian villain exists in contrast and opposition to civilization. They embody the fear of the other, or the primitive that lurks in the darkness outside the dim flickering glow of the hero's hometown or village. By giving a face and a name to these often dimly realised fears, you give the players some place to focus this fear and perhaps hatred, but also provide a clear focal point that they can strike against, giving the player party a sense of empowerment and a feeling that if they can just overcome this barbarian villain, they'll have struck a blow against the otherwise nebulous creatures and enemies lurking in the wilds. The barbarian villain tends not to be a spellcaster, although they may have a shaman, priest or other sorcerer as appropriate to the flavour of your setting, but they tend to mostly be great warriors who often lead via the force of their personality. The Barbarian has some overlap with the Warlord villain type that we'll be discussing in a later video. So, what resources do they possess? Well, a Barbarian villain is normally physically strong and often has a powerful personality that allows them to rise to lead the forces of barbarism gathering in the dark and wild places of the world, whether this is a tribe, a group of demi-humans or whatever. But what really makes the Barbarian dangerous is their single-mindedness. A Barbarian villain often chooses a single target that embodies their hatred of civilization, and they throw the full might of their forces against that target. This could be the greatest city or kingdom in the land, it could be a noble king, depends on your setting. The forces of a barbarian villain are normally chaotic and wild, murderous reavers or berserkers who rampage across the land, despoiling it and leaving the burning husks of villages in their wake. They are only held together as a cohesive force due to the personal magnetism and powerful will of the barbarian leader. This is a great strength because the barbarian has total control of his men, but also it gives the player characters a chance, if that leader is killed. His forces might begin to argue, fracture, and they'll probably disperse. So, how can you use the barbarian villain in your game? Well, they work best in a game where there's a clear delineation between civilization and everything outside it. If you're running a Dark Sun game, for instance, the whole world is pretty much barbaric. So, whilst you can have a barbarian villain in it, it pretty much feels par for the course and doesn't have the impact they might have in a more traditional D&D setting, where there are at least points of light amidst the darkness. For the most impact, start the reveal of the barbarian leader type slowly. The player characters come across a burned village here and there, they perhaps encounter a few small bands of marauders, or maybe survivors of an attack. Eventually, the attacks on the civilized lands start stepping up a bit, and the heroes hear rumours of a great and terrible leader who has wielded together the disparate tribes and is now poised to sweep down from the north, or wherever's appropriate to your game. The truly scary thing about a barbarian leader, once the PCs find out about them, is they seldom gained their power through birthright or inheritance, but generally fought their way to the top, earning their position through a series of strong characteristics that, were they not in opposition, the PCs might even admire. This ties into the sympathetic villain archetype that we'll be discussing later. Often the barbarian has some sort of grudge against civilization, whether it's that their people have been kept down, a jealousy of the fruits of civilization, or simply a hatred of a perceived weakness in civilized people. But at least their motivation is understandable, even if you don't approve of it. When the barbarian makes their final play to cast down civilization, it should be a final climactic strike against some pinnacle of civilization, a wise king perhaps, or a glittering, shining city. And this will be a huge battle with the forces of the barbarian hurling themselves against the bulwarks of civilization. Heedless of the harm inflicted on them, they throw themselves again and again against the walls until they begin to crumble under their fury. Amongst this, the heroes must find a way to turn the tide of conflict and slay the barbarian leader, causing his forces to lose heart and retreat to the darkness beyond the torchlight. For if they fail, the barbarian horde will overwhelm this bastion of civilization, and all may be lost. So, that's our video on how you can use a barbarian villain in your RPGs. I hope you've enjoyed this and you get something out of it. If you've liked the video, remember to like, share and subscribe and all that good stuff. Until we see you next time, take care, and whatever game you're playing, have fun. We'll catch you soon.